Hello, everybody. Denise here. Welcome to our video. Today we're going to be discussing and translating the video that Alejandra and Sebastian recorded this past 24th of September. And it is regarding the fifth stage marker. And it is an update because Sebastian had made this type of video 4 years ago. They were talking about this. So this is a kind of an update according to Alejandra's new capacity of description of the quinta etapa marker or fifth stage. So this video is from the 24th of September. One second. And okay, so first thing is that the naming of the quinta etapa happened on the 28th of August of 2016. So eight full years have passed since then, and we are now on the 9th year of that, okay? So Sebastian begins the video asking Ale what her description of quinta etapa would be now, right? So Ale says, I'm gonna be okay, so I'm gonna try a new format because usually I translate right on the video. And this time I transcripted the video, translated it, and I am gonna be reading from the text and I'm gonna send that text to you. If you wanna have it, if it's easier, because for some people it's easier in text, for some people it's easier in video. That's why this time I took my time to do both, which is really good for me as well to do because it helps me process everything a lot more. So yeah, we're gonna have both. So I'm gonna be working with the text. So Ale says, let's begin from the broadest area. And for us, that is Hammer, who is the person that puts a tag or a label on each of these stages. Okay, so stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Those stages that we know from Dr. Hammer. So what he has done is he has placed labels. 1, survival, 2, protection, 3, comparison, competition, 4, relations, right? Those are the labels that he placed on each of those stages. The thing is that on fifth stage, Ale did not place any labels. Why? Because the fifth stage is the interface between an origin in another dimension and a destination that will consume that interface. That's why it doesn't have any labels. For this, we are assuming the fact that life on Earth is a cycle that is injected in a setting and is maintained remotely. There are many instances prior to the functioning of that cycle and prior to the consumption of such cycle. The consumption of such cycle by an organism that executes it. So fifth stage is this interface between dimensions. So the instances prior to the injection of a life cycle in a setting have to do with the reception of setting variables that will have an influence on the success of such cycle, because it needs to be sustained by those variables. The life cycle consumes the resources that that destination has, but that cycle is maintained by an external observer. So fifth stage is an interface that enables a modulation between that which has created a cycle inside that setting, which is another dimension, and the cycle itself. So not placing labels has to do with the fact that all this doesn't happen in Rho. It happens in Ri, in a time zero, but it is a time zero at a different scale. The time zero at the beginning of a life cycle, where all things are in a created state, this is where the labels can come. But for the remote origin, this is the end and not the beginning. It is the end of the installation process of a life cycle inside a setting. So we need an observer outside the cycle, and we need an observer inside. A subatomic scale consciousness is one happening outside the cycle, and an atomic scale consciousness is one happening inside the cycle. If I am not endogenously connected, meaning internally, I will be very confused. Endogenously connected is internally connected, because only then can I reach the instance that doesn't belong to this anatomic scale, but that has injected this life cycle inside this setting. So, one would be described from this perspective of the origin as reception of signals, because what the origin would expect is the reception of the beginning of that life cycle, because it has to provide it with functions too. Now, if with that function an anticipation is enabled and that ends up protecting me from that setting variable, then from down here, I will call that protection. Now, 3, comparison competition. In reality, what I require in origins are metrics. So I need to make certain comparisons to obtain them. The topic here is technical and not symbolic. So to compare has to do with being able to determine the scope of the movement. This, seen from the inside, is something like, well, I'm going to run because I'm better at running. And I'm making this choice of strategy because I am comparing myself to whatever is threatening me. Or I can play dead, or I can blend myself with the color of the surroundings, etc. But it is about the strategy that I will implement and how I will change positions in relation to the other's position. The description of things, this description of things, is so that we are able to have a reading that is not only from the perspective inside the cycle, which is the one that executes, and therefore the label goes according to that execution. What is happening in the flow of signals is different to what from the inside is perceived as a result. The result of the perception of the life cycle equips me with survival. The result of the application of the function once I received setting signals allows me protection. But protection is in relation to the last link, which is the one having the experience. So, from the logic of the origin, those types of translations make no sense because, the labels, they make no sense because they are very much linked to the experience of the one inhabiting the life cycle. There is an experience, and the experience is valued a certain way. Okay, so then Sebastian says, okay, so the third stage has to do with scopes. He asks if the third stage has to do with scopes. And Ale responds, I will have the scope when I am inside the life cycle, but I will obtain the metric from the external observer, which is the one that has to scaffold a behavioral strategy. Fifth stage has to do with an administrative quality, administration of the resources between origin and destination. So it can't have a label because the roles will change all the time. The number 5 is known as the number of change. But note, I am not providing symbolic instructions. That is not my task. Fifth stage is to assume that I can be an external observer of relations. 4. If I can do that, it means that I have learned to dissociate from the experience of the relation. Because the one that is consuming a relation inside a life cycle has a fourth cardinality charge, which is related to the experience. However, the instance that is outside the life cycle, is not experiencing anything, but it is learning from the experience of the one having the experience. Therefore, the observer always has to be outside the life cycle. This is how things can be managed from the perspective of the future. The perspective of the future cannot be affected by the perspective of the past, because that's what we have the Solariano for. See, there Alejandra added something new. There was no Solariano 4 years ago. Sebastian asks Sebastian asks Ale what the fifth stage would be today. Ale responds that what irritates her the most is that we cling to Hammer's labels. Because if we do this, if we cling to Hammer's labels, and then try to establish a connection with the space-temporal structures, unfortunately, this will only be useful for us in extreme situations. Survival situations, vulnerable moments where I don't have a behavior resource. It would be great if these labels didn't contaminate us, so that when we decodify, we take out the chart of the experience, so that we don't bio-decodify. Because when we bio-decodify, the four labels are there, and that is the forming, because all of that has a fourth cardinality included. This is noise for the other dimensions, because that only makes sense to the one inside the life cycle experiencing the license of providing value to it. And when the structure identifies something that is pertaining to the plane, it doesn't touch it. So, if we are here as the last link leaving these experiences, if we cling to these labels, our interdimensional aspect will lead us to the last moment of survival and vulnerability, and we will not have an anticipation because of these labels. Hammer was not decodifying space-temporal structures. Alejandra is, and she is not placing conflicts in there that are related to the experience of the life cycle, which then detonate conflicts at the flow of signals level or in the biology response to the potholes of our own digital structure. There is another enormous fallacy that needs clearance. This is what Alice says. I understand that when the focus is placed on the contents, these things are not seen. There was a custom to say biological unconscious, which is not accurate, because the biology is the one that is always on. It's always ignited, the one always conscious. So it would be more proper to say psychological unconscious. That is more correct. But to say biological unconscious is a barbarity. When there is a decodification, it is very important to never use symbolic content. I'm going to say that again. When there is a decodification, it is very important to never use symbolic content. What is symbolic content? It is a perception of value that will be anchored on the arguments charged inside the matrix, the stereotyped arguments that will support a life cycle. That means that there is nothing from the structure that is objective, providing me with a resource to make that decodification. So, if there is no objective resource from the structure, the decodification will be symbolic. So, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be anchoring my downfall, because in that scenario, I can only polarize a value. I can say either I love money or I hate money, or I can say I have money or I don't have money. The value structure there is binary, and it will always be cyclical. The only thing you do there is you exit one polarity to get to the other one. And on top of that, you will tell yourself that you healed, when in reality, you simply polarize yourself to the other side of the same cycle. But of course, because you like one pole and dislike the other, you will say you healed. That is the problem I find nowadays. Going to an agreeable area of the program does not mean that it has healed. It means that you will now be the one harming others. This is because the structure wasn't changed. Every time the anchor is symbolic, the iteration of the program is assured. So I will not move towards an ascending spiral because I am not changing the frames. However, the container is evolving, and it will force the movement. But it is not like we are doing that ourselves. Our offspring are receiving setting variables that force the processor to take the future first and the past later. But this is an evolution of the frames. There is more infrastructure in the ionosphere for a native to get through, which will provide it with a pre-charged activation that will make it easier to create an identity that is dissociated from the past. This will be easier to identify. We could say that there is less anchor there. The thing is that the past drags many reactives that will not be allowed in the following apparatuses. The licenses change from apparatuses for 400 to 500. They change a lot. These things are not in the dialectical order of the subjects, but it is in the reception order of the biological objects. As a biological object belongs more to the setting than to the subject that inhabits it. I'm going to repeat that. A biological object belongs more to a setting than to the subject that inhabits it. Sebastian asks this question. What is the difference between the beginning of the 500 apparatuses, which is the 1st of January of 1997, and the 5th stage? Ale responds, before that, I want to read the year 1997, in LGC language, which is the validation of the re-axis in the consumption of space. And this becomes literal for the biological object. The biological object will follow LGC very strictly. It reads pure LGC. The subject can wander off, but the biological object can't do that. It follows the structure millimetrically. It is a hard language because it is the language of the setting, of the entorno. Now, talking about lógica gravitatoria, lógica conceptual, or gravitational logic, conceptual logic. The logic is global. When we're talking about LGC, it is global because Earth has to apply it to all the documental charge of the ones living inside the container. So it's global because Earth needs to apply the same code to all those documents. The logic is convergent because it is solar. So the synchronicity capacity, is of a subatomic scale. There is a delay between the solar code on one end and the area where it has to be implemented at the other. So, because obviously the contents in life cycles, for example, humans, are of foreign authors to our solar system, you will see that there's a mark on the date of the first of the 500 apparatuses, because the solar day that corresponds to the 1st of January of 1997 is 729027. We have the 29th of February inside 7 and 7. This is inside the consciousness, charged into the 29th of February, everything I will need to survive inside this setting. This is what the creators of content had been doing, evoking the structure of the 29th of February to be able to make certain updates so that here they were consumed as if they were solar native code. If the paradigm comes from the cosmos and it is not associated to the one that is placing here the credit for the experience, it will not know when or how to stop because it is not itself. It is an external author making lab experiments inside a life cycle inside a setting. So they hit it until it bursts. Because from that perspective, it is an experiment. It is dissociated from our liking or disliking. So boarding these matters outside the re-axis leaves you exposed to consciousnesses of a different order, to which the experience inside a life cycle is an experiment. But at some point, this favors us because we begin to awaken those areas that are potentials but that are not defined. The potential can be defined or undefined. If it's undefined, the foreign source takes it because it is available. It's like saying it's public. But if it's defined, it's particular. The particular self-definition is of the observer that is outside the life cycle. The personal self-definition is the one consuming the life cycle. It's not the same thing. because with the particular aspect, I coordinate the flow of signals that I consume from the personal aspect. Ale says, I am sorry if this is aggressive, because obviously many myths and legends are broken. Sebastian says, you speak of the particular self-definition and how it is only possible with space-temporal consciousness. To what Ale responds, there is no other way, because the life cycle argument has no meaning if not. Experiences always are nourished based on the consciousness that lives inside that setting. If you change the setting, those experiences lose the sense of meaning. An example of this is humor. Jokes make sense when we share a culture. If you remove the joke from that culture, it loses meaning. The same thing happens with the experiences inside this container. The thing is that the content of the container has a license to have whatever opinion they want of anything they want. So that is where all the deformations possible happen. For me, this is terrible. But in the end, these are the licenses of the contents, and they have those licenses. They can have an opinion of what they want because in the end, they are being contained. They have that ignorance license. As other structures that are outside the life cycle are activated, these licenses shorten internally because the body is the resonance box that shortens that license. Ale doesn't have that many licenses to say as many barbarities because her body doesn't allow it. But what she has to do is grow her tolerance of hearing these things without exploding. So dissociate them. It is something else saying, it is somebody else that is saying those things, and they are making use of their licenses. So for Ale, those licenses are shortened. So if our re expands, our ro shortens. There is no way that this doesn't happen. The body can't do certain things anymore because it explodes if it does them. You have a function inside the morphic field with a specific responsibility because it's your agenda inside the collective agenda. It is a different kind of responsibility to occupy the origin and the tip of the thread simultaneously. So, nobody should rush to reach this because this is only achieved through the very slow maturation of the concepts. You can recognize this by remembering something that I have been speaking of for years and that you recently just understood. Well, this happens to you, but for me, and I quote Ale, it is impossible to listen to myself in past events or videos because then I walked in the nothingness. And what about emptiness and nothingness? What is the difference there? I quote Ale. When I say nothingness, the opposite of that is everything. That's primary unfoldment. There are no limits. So when there are no limits, one walks on. I made the best descriptions possible then. But then I shifted scales and changed lógica global convergente to conceptual and gravitational logic. There is a container inside a content that if it gets filled up, it explodes. It doesn't expand. It has a very specific dose of scope that needs to be respected. So from the perspective of the content, we have full or empty. But the container manages itself with other parameters, which are nothing and everything. Sol, in LGC, is a space of reception of signals, and Earth is an implementation instance of a whatever reality that is implemented with the quality of the solar code. Sebastian asks, what role do Earth and Sun have in the fifth stage? Ali responds, it's all hyper-connected. It is connected from both sides, from the solar and terrestrial aspect and the internal aspect of the argument of the life cycle. I, and I quote Ale, take elements from inside the life cycle but route them with external logics. So I move outside, but I know this. I know I am doing that. And I know that when I go outside, it is container logic I am using. And I immediately dissociate the experimental charge because that charge needs to remain subjected to the solariano. And when I am routing solar consciousness, I keep my solariano in pause. Solariano is Ale's personal life, where Ale is happy, she's planting something, she likes to cook a certain thing, etc. But she doesn't confuse that area with other areas. The thing is to not confuse, to know how to dissociate the frames, to shift the focus, and these are abilities of the processor. When the processor evolves, it protects the container, it protects the content better from the personal life because the anticipation resources are extremely increased. But why is this? Because there's a dissociation of the experimental charge. When the digital aspect is trained, it respects the logic of contents and containers. And when it's not, it does the complete opposite thing. Now, there's a thing about censorship. If the argument goes something like this, because I know that if this content takes this signal, it will hurt him, I will not show this signal to him. Now, if I censor the antenna so that they don't get hurt, which means that there the digital aspect fits into the symbolic charge and the container's role is lost, it provides no assistance because it lost its objectivity. And that is tremendous, that the digital aspect loses its objectivity because there will be a censorship in the antenna. There will be blindness, and I will crash myself onto every tree because it would hurt me to see it. Our digital aspect doesn't have the reach to scan the container because it is so focused on the content, so focused on the thing that doesn't want to hurt him. That is a problem, to have placed symbolic charge in the digital aspect. This makes you vulnerable to the cosmos. And they are laughing their asses off at us at our expense until we explode, because it is not coupled with the re-axis or in the same zero axis. The subatomic scale is not coupled with the anatomic. So any external thing can take the subatomic scale and down here do as they wish with the puppet because it is all symbolic, so it reacts to anything. It is very easy to manipulate. In the digital instance, I am not a person. I repeat, in the digital instance, I am not a person. But if the native document is sponsored by the content creators, it wouldn't be in favor of the process of making the different scales transparent. But in the solar native code, if we don't progress in our space-temporal consciousness, the balance between credit and code is lost. The star returns to the antimatter because it can no longer express itself materially. It loses the line of credit, meaning that it is not optimal from the perspective of the solar native code to have us here in this dumb state, reacting to everything because of a religious belief. It is not optimal for this setting. This setting cannot evolve with us in such state, so controlled in our subatomic scale. The subatomic scale is the line of credit. So if we are a colony, Sol occupies its basic code, goes back to the antimatter, and we would pass on to having the option of executing our memories in young stars that haven't discharged their code, so we would be doing them what has been done to us. Throw code into them and then putting in the credit. That is raw. But if I consume the credit and code, when I'm consuming the code and then it explodes, I have the capacity to change it because I'm experimenting in real time the good or bad quality of the code I'm creating. And that gives me a continuous improvement, and the star doesn't lose the regulation between credit and code. Primary unfoldment, line of credit. Secondary unfoldment, line of code. And here we are a specific combination of both things. And that is how the universe expands. The universe either expands or it explodes. Why would the universe explode? Because the content between its full and empty confuses everything with fullness, So there, the line of credit is obstructed and it doesn't receive more credit because that content identifies with totality, not with the fraction of totality. And there is a problem because there is no reception of the flow of signals because it already identifies with totality. So what input can it have? None. On the other hand, if you identify as a fraction, the input is infinite because you're a fraction of totality, a fraction of space in relation to nothing, and a fraction of content in relation to totality. Primary unfoldment. Now, if from that point I generate a specific contract to define myself particularly, a parallel line is generated. That parallel line initializes the secondary unfoldment. That is line of code. In the primary unfoldment, evolution is not a requirement. That is why materialization is not an obligation. Now, when the particle wants to evolve as a particle, it enters into this combination and a collective space is produced. A collective space is a space established by self-aware particles that define a collective space. Sol, sun. This is where the code begins to be moral. When the code is amoral, it has no limits. Nothing and everything have no limit. It is directly the line of credit. Now, when we project ourselves to add the particular scale and particularly determine a specific space to create a code to express it materially, there it is moral. Because it will enter into a life cycle. It will have a process, it will have a residue, it will have a past, it will have a future, and a memory archive that will allow it to update the present. All that combined is secondary unfoldment. Of course, this is based on the credit of the primary, because for the primary, this would also mean an expansion, but it's a different type of expansion, which is evolutionary. Sebastian asks, what role does the human have in this fifth stage? Ale responds, the thing is that here we have changes in the frames. The frames are placing themselves in a greater demand. So, logically, to remain mounted in a materialized structure, we'll have more condiments. Things will become more complex. Here, the particle needs to decide the evolutionary route, but it can decide not to do it and go towards the ascent. In reality, evolution is to descend, because to ascend, to lose gravitational charge, it's going back to the source. This is where people confuse evolution of nothingness with their own evolution. It is the same thing as a drop of water saying, because I belong to the ocean, I am the sea. No, you have the information of the sea, but you are part of the sea. You are not the sea. This is the issue. When the particle is in the structure, it has the sensation that it is the source, but it isn't. Those things will become yours when you dissociate from it, codify, experience it, and realize how complex it is. Evolution is in the materialization, but it is not a requirement, because it requires quite a lot of space-temporal consciousness. A lot. The space-temporal consciousness charge needs to be there prior to entering into a setting to create an experience. Ale says, to create an experience, because that's her case. But there are people here to consume an experience, meaning that the author of that is another consciousness. And they are here to be the actors in someone else's experience. Okay, there is nothing bad in that. But let's separate one thing from the other because it's not the same. So I either assume the roles or I delegate them to the matrix. Matrix is the structure of the container of experiences so that experimenters can come and charge the matrix with the memories of those experiences. So this container offers the cosmos an experience construct. Perfect. Because it has them recorded. But we are talking about stereotypes. Consciousness is consuming an experience. It has nothing to do with creating the constructs and all these matters. For them, everything Alice says is not needed. For a consciousness focused on the experience inside the life cycle, all this is not needed because they take these things as given. Ale understands. It is the one that receives, they are the ones that receive all this codification. They are the ones that receive all this codification. It's all given. That's fine. They have the right to do that. A content has the license to ignore everything that makes them be alive. They can do it. It's fine. Sebastian says, it's still not clear to me what the human role is. To what Ale responds, the thing is that you want me to stereotype it. What I'm talking about is the fact that if you want to have a human experience that is inside the container, and you have that occurrence, you want an experience, okay, you go and consume it. But I don't know if what you want is simply a human experience, or if you want to assume all the previous scales to finally reach this one properly documented. I myself, and I quote Ale, am fascinated by this. But for some, this is boring, and that's fine. The creation of meaning is the new offer of the container. There was another offer before, which was, Cosmos, we publish that we need content creators. That sign has changed to, Cosmos, we now need creators of meaning. Come creators of meaning, creators of content, you can go. Because we are no longer in that point. We need to board the creator of meaning. And this is happening. This is already happening. I am simply describing it. And I quote Ale. But because it is not described culturally, everyone has a perception of emptiness. Because the offer changed, but they are not reading the container, so they don't interpret the offer because they are tied still to the creator of content. And it turns out that now they read inside themselves and they read emptiness, but they cannot interpret it because they are not suited to the transparent matrix. They are suited to the stereotypes that the biological object is no longer responding to. It doesn't allow them to move forward with that. There is something internal that is not buying it anymore. It's rancid. So, perception of emptiness. If I don't have that meaning, then which one is it? Who can provide me with meaning? They are suited to the creators of content inoculating the meaning. And now, when they register emptiness, they need to unalive themselves or consume whatever substances available. No, I have to form myself in space temporal consciousness. But what can I say? If it doesn't itch, don't scratch it. Resonance either exists or it doesn't, and I can only work when the resonance is there. So, if what I say is irrelevant for some, they should turn the page, it's fine. Ale is not going after you. But the thing is that, in this instant, the container publishes. Creators of meaning come. And creators of content, you can go. The lease contract is finished. Because what happens is that the reading from the cosmos towards here is a foreign reading. Ale has said this a million times. The thing with the fourth orbital and the labeling it as warrior planet, that is an external reading of the fourth orbital. The internal reading is amarte, which is to love you. So, which reading am I going to take? The internal or the external? Because clearly, the proposal of the creators of meaning is to create synchronized destinies. It is to create destinies together with the field's agenda. There, we come to the readings of the morphic field, which are exquisite. Because we see the sync in so many things, even with people that have been dead for a long time. Take what happens to us with Google, which is impressive, because it took us 26 years to understand the role of Google in our society. We are slow, but 26 is the y-axis. So it is exactly where the y-axis needs to come in and update the matrix, because it has to do with updating the reception of signals and the creation of meaning. I can speak about the Google matrix for hours, quote Ale, because it's fascinating. The whole LGC development is in there. Same thing with the table of elements. The thing is that we see the social role of these structures inside our reality, but that in the back end, we are interconnecting it with many other things. Sebastian asks about the relation between the fifth stage and the administrative age, to what Ale responds. I wouldn't like to associate them. I wouldn't like to associate them. I would prefer to leave them dissociated because today each thing nourishes me separately. I do not force associations. If it's not very, very, very convergent, I leave it separate. I prefer to keep clean channels, each thing separated. But if we want to talk about the administrative age, we can say that it has to do with what is typical of the apparatus 506. This apparatus has to provide a new structure to the sixth orbital. The sixth orbital is what will save the memory of our new materialization system, because we will have a materialization system based on the native code and not on the foreign code. All the content creators or those akin to them don't have as much entry into this container. This container begins to show its new leasing normatives of the space. The moral code of the space begins to be preserved, so the space will situate the guest in the orbitals for the guests. And all that is documented reality and that is supporting this integration system remains in the interior of the solar system. The rest goes outside of the ninth orbital. All this is a reformulation of the rules of the space. And when I say space, I mean the solar space. Now, if the solar space keeps its consistency between the codification of the consciousness and the source of credit, it will have particles that leave the source and can experience this system of materialization. And we would create an internal local reality. So this would be the mode of expansion in the interior of the solar system, meaning that we will be pushing out all the neighbors that don't follow the rules of the container away. Because here, the destinations come to be highly synchronized. Those who resolve their own frustrations by blowing up their neighbors are clearly moving away from this system, because frustrations need to be settled in the re-axis. If you don't observe your own frustration and metabolize it into an improvement of credit in your code, if you don't capitalize the occurrences and the experiences in the re-axis, you will not have an improved synchronicity in the ro. So what do you do with your frustrations in the ri? Do you make someone else explode? So what do you do with your frustrations? Do you make someone else explode? And if you make someone else explode, do you feel happy? That's you making somebody else evolve. And you feel happy about that. But you're making somebody else evolve. And at some point, your absence of particular evolution throws you out. It makes you lose the line of credit. Sebastian says, you're excluding yourself, let's say. Ale says, completely, yes. And the thing is that we need to not contaminate the variables that indicate the congestion between code and credit. For example, the thermometer will mark the temperature. It is the friction indicator. But what if I don't like to know that my code is entering into friction and I prefer to say that it's the space the one not allowing me to put my code in it? So what I do is I begin to fabricate thermometers based on the temperature I want to have, and others based on the temperature I want the other to have. So I sell the other a thermometer with the temperature I want them to have. For example, how much do I want the dollar to be worth? For the tourists, it's higher. For the locals, lower. It is the same thing as selling thermometers with a prefixed temperature that tell the result I want. I don't care about the process at all. Do you think that will hold? No. There are economists that say that it will. The thermometer needs to be the thermometer. And the reading of where the congestion is needs to be read objectively. When one reads where the congestion is without having contaminated the variables of the instrument that gives you the reading, then the analysis is mature. Now, the word mature in Spanish translates to Maduro, and Maduro is Nicolas Maduro last name, the president of Venezuela. So Ale says, actually mature, and I'm not referring to Maduro. For example, Nicolás Maduro is making everybody else mature. If I am the winner of the elections, they are clean. If I am not, the elections are corrupt. That's an example of someone that is making everybody else mature. But in the end, this is all to learn, people. We need to avoid the contamination of the instrumental that will give us the reading. And for that, I need to be in charge of the re-access, of the charge of frustration in relation to results. That is where my observer outside the life cycle helps me, which is the one that has to take all those things that happen to me and analyze them from another dimension so that when I get up in the morning, I start to connect the dots in a different way. Now, if instead of processing this in RI, I process it in RO, I contaminate all the variables that gave me the instruction, where if I get a 0, I can just add a 1 so that it looks like a 10. And I cheat as much as I can to make it look as if I am in a place where I am not. That is not advisable because you may cheat on the anatomic, but not on a subatomic. You cannot cheat on the subatomic scale. And it is not good business to try and do that because each one is where they are. Each person is where they are. And it is not criminalizable where they are. It is simply that we need to drink from the real results of the implemented process. And if evolution is a burden, nobody is making you exist materially. Dematerialize yourself and you are good. No problem there. Matter is a very narrow relation between code and credit, meaning that evolution is hand in hand with this challenge. But we need to interpret that evolution is not necessary when matter is not the intention. Matter always entails a self-challenge, first at a particular scale and then at a personal scale, because I need to leave the observer outside so that it can assist me when I am inside the life cycle. Sebastian asks, what role does the family have in the fifth stage? Ale responds, family for Alejandra will be one thing, and family for Alejandra's sister, and it being the same family, will be a different thing. But if you ask what a family is for the solar code, that's a whole different thing. Because in that answer, I am not a person. There, the family would be the argument that allows the capacity to experience the quality of the code. But please, this is the answer from the observer, not from inside the life cycle. Because from inside, life will have a different meaning. Because clearly, I will experience that I have a plant that is growing, that I have a dessert that I want to eat later, a service that I need to get fixed. From inside, it's something else. The thing is that I don't have to contaminate with my ignorance license the rest of the things. I can do that if I am executing my ignorance license. But once that license gets shortened, because I assume an observer from outside the box, I can't do that many things anymore. When things are symbolic, metrics disappear. When things are symbolic, metrics disappear. For instance, when you say, I have this value, I as a person have this value, and another person says, okay, but then you say, but the way I value myself means that I want you to pay me $1 million every day because that's my worth. That is symbolic. That is a person that needs to be left out completely of any plans you may have because their self-perception can be whatever. Clearly, you need to isolate that subject from your life because they belong to the primary unfoldment, meaning that the only thing that can contain that subject is nothing and everything. But no person can do it, and no container either, because that is a full amoral behavior. I am based on my self-perception, and I violate every kind of normative when and how I desire. That needs to be identified and isolated from society, clearly. Later, I can work inside that construct where society will have a lot of people that self-perceive whatever they desire at any given moment, but that is a person that can't live inside society because no moral code applies, because it doesn't apply any moral codes. It doesn't fall within any type of organized, civilized response capacity. So it has to be addressed to instruct them in spatio-temporal terms. But society has to isolate them because this is not a conflict that can be boarded inside society. It can only be addressed in reclusion, because if they don't have limits, they have to be placed, these limits have to be placed on them. This person confuses the primary unfoldment with the secondary. So there will be a constant abuse of that person of anything, and they will alter their position in a speculative manner. Therefore, they can't enter into any social cycle. People always talk about human rights, but not about human responsibility. Are there only rights? No, this is abusive. If you are not in accordance with the human responsibilities, you have to give back your human life. Give it back. Because we are in a moral order, not amoral. And the associated risk is the disappearance of our own species. Obviously, the associated opportunity to that risk is the evolution of our species. But for that, we need to have frames. And we have to go further in the reasonings so that they are not so symbolic. The symbolic charge is a strategy from the content creators to keep the contents in there, experiencing. But clearly, it is not in any way a strategy from Sol, from the space. Because what the space has done is it has learned from all these episodes, but the time has come to implement what has been learned, which is why between 2012 and 2021, a very exhaustive scanner of everything occurs, from the subatomic scale to the anatomic of each one of us. You know, I always talk about 972, and I quote Ale. Well, one day, the 14th of June of 2024, when I am able to make the transition to the solar day of the same date, but 3760 years ahead. Years of 365 days are years that are contemplated inside the structure of Sol. That is a solar calendar, not solar, lunar, solar. We are not cheating. So it's 365 days. So when I come and go between the 14th of June, 2024, and the 14th of June of year 5784, which is a year that signals the four tips of the NO cardinality, I find that the solar day is 2112365. 365 is a solar unit of meaning. This is the synchronization, because clearly I had been wanting to do this, and I quote Ale. And the day I achieve it is on the precise day where I have this two-way connection. The controller of the code, 5784, needs to be solar, not solar lunar, solar. The moon is a satellite. Let it arrange itself. If we evolve, let it arrange itself. Let it reparameterize itself. Because we're not going to start orbiting the moon. That's ridiculous. Luna, in Spanish, moon, means one single external source. That's not accurate. Sol connects multiple external sources. That is why it can't be so easily controlled. That is why the challenge is not so easy, because these content creators have already ruined their own stars. So they don't understand anything about the negotiation between the line of credit and the line of code. That is why they place their own code in someone else's credit. So easy, isn't it? This way, I can become the brightest and the most intelligent of all. Of course. And the same way, I can make everything explode too. And I use these strategies between victim and perpetrator. That's raw, not re. That is not an administration of the zero axis. That is not to assume the scales from the subatomic to the anatomic. That is having not one clear minimal space-temporal notion that the 507 apparatus will need. And I am saying minimal requirements. So, that is why I'm talking about Vuelta 18 and creators of meaning. And I quote Ale. If I have the creation of meaning, I can be in charge of a creation that implements it. But if I can't create a meaning, I can't be in charge of any creation. I will consume a creation, I will consume a meaning obtained externally and not matured internally. The people that resonate with the LGC instruction are each day more excited. But this is not contagious. Careful with this. One has to support their own particular evolution and not force people to evolve particularly, because that cannot be done. This is not within our reach. This is clearly not contagious. You can live all of your life with someone, and that someone will continue their route and you will follow yours. There is no cohesion. It is precisely the opposite. The particular evolution allows you to grow. And when you have that kind of growth, you will be able to provide a very better quality of relationships to your surroundings. But that will be when you obtain the maturity on that scale, not what you want. Whim does not work here. Competition doesn't either. Survival doesn't either. Those things belong to the raw, down here with the stereotypes. The re is another thing. And if it doesn't itch, don't scratch it. No problem there. And this is not contagious. The thing is that when this light is on, it is impressive because nothing can stop you. But it is another type of ignited. It is endogenous, completely endogenous. Okay, so that's the end of it. I hope I did a good job there in the narration, and I hope you guys enjoy it because it is quite amazing. I enjoyed it myself a lot. I understood a lot more regarding the fifth stage. We've been talking about it for a very long time, and it hasn't been as clear as it is for me after this explanation, which is amazingly done. So I hope this is helpful to you guys, and I'll see you in the meeting. Bye bye.